You think you're free, but freedom doesn't always come with chains. Sometimes it comes with applause. You're not imprisoned. You're being celebrated, not for who you are, but for how well you perform a role you never even chose. They gave it to you before you could speak, before you could resist, before you could ask, "Is this me?" Or just a very well-written lie. Shakespeare saw it. All the world's a stage, and all the men merely players. Not most men, all. You're on a stage right now. You've been on it since you were a child. And the tragedy is, you weren't asked if you wanted to act. They handed you the script. They smiled when you memorized your lines. And every time you tried to step off stage, they made you feel ashamed. From the moment you could read, you were taught the story. Get good grades, get into college, land a stable job, find a wife, buy a house, raise kids, retire well, fade quietly. Every step mapped out like a screenplay, each scene complete with props, report cards, diplomas, wedding photos, business cards, retirement speeches. They called it normal. They called it success. But they never asked you, does this script belong to you? If you follow it too well, they call you driven. If you deviate, they call you lost. That's how you know it's not freedom, because real freedom allows disobedience. This was always obedience dressed up as destiny. Why did they write it this way? Because when every man lives the same plotline, the system doesn't have to adapt. You do. You become easy to manage, easy to exploit, easy to manipulate. Just hand a man a definition of success, then make him fear being anything else. It works best when you think the role is your identity, that your worth is in your performance, that if you stop acting, you might disappear. But what if the applause isn't for you? What if it's for how convincingly you've played the part? What if your whole life you've been succeeding in a story that someone else wrote? And what happens when you perform the script perfectly but feel absolutely nothing? What happens when every box is checked, but the voice in your head keeps whispering, "This isn't it"? You start to question not just the story, but the storyteller. Who sold you this version of life? Who decided that obedience is virtue and exhaustion is pride? Who benefits from your silence, your routine, your constant self-doubt masked as discipline? You were taught to dream, but only dreams that fit the system. You were allowed ambition, but only if it looked like the last man's. You were never told that freedom might look like failure from the outside, that walking away might be the most honest act of all. Because if success means betraying yourself quietly until you're applauded into the grave, is it even worth it? You're not just tired, you're tired of pretending, of being the man everyone else wrote for you. And for the first time, you're beginning to wonder what your life would look like without the script. You did everything right, so why does it still feel wrong? You did everything they told you to do. You worked hard, you played nice, you climbed every rung of the ladder without complaining. And now you've made it. You're respected, stable, successful. So why do you feel like a stranger inside your own skin? You wake up every morning to a life that looks good on paper, but feels hollow in your chest. The title, the income, the house, the schedule, all signs of winning. But winning what, exactly? Because behind the confident emails and calendar invites, you feel something dark gnawing at the edges. You're not exhausted from the work. You're exhausted from pretending the work still matters. They told you success would feel like a rival, that the higher you climbed, the more you'd feel like yourself. But no one warned you. You can build a perfect life for the wrong person. You're not broken. You're not lost. You're just wearing someone else's crown, sitting on someone else's throne, living out a destiny that never had your name on it. You followed the script so well, you forgot to ask if the role fits the actor. Shakespeare saw this coming. In Macbeth, a loyal warrior is told he's destined to be king. So he kills, he manipulates, He loses himself in the pursuit of power he was told belonged to him. And when he finally sits on the throne, he doesn't feel victorious. He feels empty, because the throne was never the point. It was just the stage. Macbeth wasn't corrupted by power. He was hollowed out by performance. He thought being king would make him real, but all it made him was alone. That's the part they don't tell men. You can succeed and still feel like a fraud, not because you're undeserving, but because you're not aligned. You're living a script that rewards compliance, not authenticity. And no matter how high you go, it will never fill what it quietly erodes: your sense of self. Look around. How many high-functioning men are quietly falling apart? How many executives can't sleep without a bottle of whiskey or a prescription? How many leaders feel like actors waiting for the curtain to fall? They're not weak, they're not failing. They're just out of sync with the story they're living. Because there's a difference between being good at the game and belonging in it. You might be winning, but is this the war you ever meant to fight? The truth is brutal. You were trained to serve a system, not yourself. You were conditioned to chase symbols, not meaning. You were rewarded not for being awake, but for staying asleep with your eyes open. And the more successful you become in that system, the harder it is to admit you don't recognize the man you've become. Because if you are successful, but you still feel unfulfilled, then everything you believed about success starts to collapse. That collapse isn't failure, it's revelation. The script told you who to be. Shakespeare shows you what happens when a man becomes his role instead of becoming himself. Macbeth gained everything but lost the one thing he couldn't fake: his soul. And maybe that's the question you've been avoiding. Not, am I successful, but successful at what cost? What did you bury to become who they applauded? What part of you did you silence to wear the crown without shaking? You thought you were building a legacy, but maybe you were just constructing a very elegant prison. And the scariest part? You can't leave the role now without letting the whole illusion collapse. Because people don't love who you are, they love who you perform to be. You are the perfect man in a life that was never truly yours. So what happens next? You thought you chose this life, the job, the house, the status, the path. But what if you didn't? What if it was all pre-written, and you just memorized your lines too well to notice? Success isn't something you chase. It's something you were taught to desire before you even had a language for it. Before you understood who you were told who you should be. And from that moment forward, you stopped becoming. You started performing. It didn't begin with ambition, it began with obedience. You got a gold star in first grade because you followed instructions. You got praise in high school because you played the part of the good son. You got respect in your 20s because you buried your chaos beneath productivity. You were never rewarded for asking who you are. You were rewarded for acting like someone the system could use. And the better you played that role, the more they applauded. Not because they loved you, because they recognized their script being obeyed. The system doesn't need to imprison you. It just needs to give you a costume, a goal, and a spotlight. And it knows exactly what bait to use. Masculinity. Touch a man's pride, and you can make him do anything. In Othello, Shakespeare shows us this trap. A man of honor, a general, respected and strong, but he's manipulated into murder, not by violence, not by force, but by the idea that someone might tarnish his image. Iago didn't kill Othello. Othello did, by trying to protect the role he thought made him worthy. That's how the system breaks you, not by fighting you, but by convincing you that who you appear to be is more valuable than who you are. You think you're building your future, but really, you're reenacting a fantasy someone else implanted in you. They told you to dream big, but the dream had conditions, timelines, metrics, milestones. It wasn't a dream, it was a contract, and you signed it before you even learned to say no. Look closely. Every stage of your life came with a script attached. Be polite, get good grades, don't be a burden. Go to college, pick a stable career, marry well, buy property, raise kids, die with a pension and a smile. This isn't freedom, this is formatting. And if you ever hesitate, if you ever stop and ask, wait, is this what I want? They look at you with disappointment, like you forgot your line, like you're ruining the scene. Because your role isn't to be conscious, it's to be consistent. You wonder why you feel lost, because your life has been written in a language that doesn't belong to your soul. Every achievement, just another sentence in a story you didn't author. You've mistaken structure for meaning, approval for truth, obedience for self-worth, and now you're waking up not just to the lie, but to your loyalty to it. You weren't forced into this cage. You walked in proudly because they called it success. They called it being a real man. They told you this was the only script that mattered, and you believed them. But here's the question they never want you to ask. Who benefits when you play your role perfectly and never look up? You think you're living, but what you're really doing is preserving an image you're too afraid to break. You wake up every morning not to live, but to continue the episode. Same lines, same posture, same tension in your jaw that no sleep ever relieves. You're not excited, you're not angry, you're not even bored, you're just maintaining a version of you that's been optimized for performance, but hollowed out of presence. You do everything right. You show up, work hard, provide, stay disciplined, and yet a part of you still whispers, why does it all feel so empty? That voice gets louder in silence, louder after achievements, louder after promotions, louder when you're alone with your reflection, and you can't tell if you're proud or just tired. And here's the strangest part. You start resenting the people who aren't successful, because there's something in their eyes, raw, unedited, unfiltered, that makes you feel exposed. You envy their freedom, even if they have nothing, because they're not pretending. You are. That rage you carry, it's not towards your boss, not towards your partner, not towards the system. It's toward yourself, the part of you that knows you've become loyal to a life that doesn't feel like yours. Shakespeare knew this soul death well. He wrote, "Poor wretch that for a dream of happiness gave his soul in exchange." That's what you've done. You've sacrificed depth for the comfort of being seen as doing well. You've traded your fire for applause, and the trap is deeper than you think. Because the better you play the role, the harder it is to walk off the stage. The more status you earn, the more invested you become in the lie. The system doesn't need you to be stupid, it just needs you to be busy. So busy chasing significance, you forget to question whether any of this actually matters to you. And the cruel genius of it all? The more disciplined you are, the more reliable, the more respectable, the more imprisoned you become, not by force, but by your own reputation. You can't stop now, because if you stop, people will ask why, and you won't have an answer that makes sense to anyone still inside the play. That's how the machine defends itself. It doesn't need guards. It just needs to make you afraid of what happens if you drop the mask. And the irony? You've worked so hard to become someone that you no longer remember who you were before you needed to be anyone. So now the real question is, are you living? Or are you just trying not to disappoint the version of you that everyone's already clapped for? You've built a life. You've earned titles. You've played the role well, so well, you forgot you were acting. You don't actually believe in the script anymore, but you still follow it, not because it's true, but because without it, you don't know who you are. And that's the deeper prison. It's not that you're stuck in the role, it's that the role has become your skin. Shakespeare saw this long before us. In King Lear, the old king gives up his throne, his kingdom, his power, his crown. And what happens? Nobody respects him. Nobody listens to him. Nobody sees him anymore. Why? Because Lear had nothing left once he shed the role. No throne, no voice, no identity. Just a man who never learned how to exist outside his mask. That's not just Lear's tragedy. It's yours too. Strip away your title. Remove your career. Silence the applause. And ask, what's left of you? Would people still listen if you didn't have a business card? Would your family still respect you if you didn't bring home a paycheck? Would you still respect yourself if there was nothing left to perform? The truth is brutal. Most men don't fear failure. They fear becoming invisible. They fear not being someone, even if that someone is killing them inside. So they cling to the script. They recite the lines. They play the part, and they smile, while bleeding in silence. It's easier to keep pretending than to risk being misunderstood. You've invested years, maybe decades, into becoming this version of you. To walk away now feels like burning the house you built with your own hands. But deep down, you know the truth. It was never your house. It was a set. And you were just the actor. And let's be honest, there's a sick kind of comfort in the predictability of the role. You know the cues. You know what people expect. You know exactly who you have to be accepted. Even if it costs you your soul. Sometimes the performance feels safer than authenticity, because authenticity demands risk, it demands rejection, it demands solitude. And most men aren't afraid of starting over. They're afraid there's nothing real to start from. That's how the machine wins. Not when it beats you, but when it convinces you that you are the mask, that the applause was love, that the obedience was virtue, that the busyness was meaning. You're not addicted to success. You're addicted to identity. And until you're willing to lose who you were told to be, you'll never meet who you really are. So ask yourself, if the role no longer fits, but you still keep playing, who exactly are you performing for? The most dangerous cage is the one you decorate yourself. You polish it, you personalize it. You convince yourself it's freedom. Because the bars look like achievement, the walls are made of praise, and the lock is pride. You've mastered the role. You've earned the applause. But now, the applause owns you, and no one manipulates you deeper than the mask you refuse to let go of. Shakespeare knew this better than anyone. In Hamlet, the question isn't just life or death, it's realness or role. To be or not to be. To exist as a soul or continue as a character. To live from the inside out or perform until the curtain falls. The tragedy of Hamlet wasn't just indecision. It was that he knew too much to keep pretending, but feared too much to break free. That's the same edge you're standing on right now. You feel it in the silence, in the nights you can't sleep, in the moments when the world applauds and you feel nothing, because you're not even sure who they're clapping for anymore. But here's the truth no one tells you. You don't need a new role. You don't need a better mask. You don't even need to find yourself. You need to stop lying, not to the world, to yourself. You already know this isn't working. You already know the script is hollow. You already know that success, this version of it, was never written for your soul. So what now? You stop, you drop the act, even if no one else is ready. Even if the audience is still watching, still cheering, still expecting, because the first step to truth is silence. Not a grand announcement, not a rebrand, just a quiet refusal to continue being who you're not. And that starts with one question. What am I living for? Not what you're chasing, not what you've been told to achieve, not what impresses others. What matters? When the room is empty, when no one's watching, no one's applauding, no one's grading you, that answer, if it's real, won't come with fanfare. It will come like grief. Because to find your real self, you have to bury the character you spent your life perfecting. This is where most men run. They panic in the silence. They numb themselves with ambition. They search for a new mask instead of sitting with their naked soul. But don't flinch. That discomfort is the doorway. Let the false roles rot. Let the noise fade. Let the anger come. Let the sadness stay. Because beneath it all, there's a voice you've ignored for years. A presence inside you that never wanted this stage. A hunger not for success, but for truth. Forget everything they taught you about winning. Forget the curated images of perfect lives. Forget the metrics. Your worth isn't in what you produce, or what you perform, or how well you imitate the script. Your worth is in your willingness to face the void without costume, to sit in the dark and ask, if I stop performing, do I still exist? If that question terrifies you, good. That means you're close, because only men who've lived too long in the role fear the silence of being. And only those willing to face that silence ever get to become the author of their own life. You've spent your life performing a script written by hands you never met. Parents, teachers, bosses, society, culture, they all gave you a role. They called it maturity. They called it duty. They called it being a real man. And you played it well. You worked hard. You succeeded. You became exactly who they said you should become. But now, in the quiet hours, you're starting to hear it. That whisper, that ache, that ancient part of you, that never wanted this life, that never agreed to the script. And here's the truth they'll never put in textbooks. Success, as they define it, is just obedience in a nicer suit. It's slavery in the language of dreams. It's bondage through praise. You were never meant to live by someone else's formula. You were meant to write your own mythology. You were never built to fit. You were built to forge, to shape meaning, to carve soul, to find fire, even if it means walking alone. Shakespeare said it best. This, above all, to thine own self be true. Not to your paycheck, not to your title, not to your father's expectations, not even to your past self. Just to the raw, terrifying truth of who you really are beneath the mask. Even if that truth makes you an outcast, even if it makes you the villain in someone else's story. Because freedom doesn't come when the system gives you permission. It comes when you stop needing it. So now you stand at a threshold, two doors. One leads back to the comfort of applause, routine, respectability. The other, into the unknown, the unformed, the uncontrollable, the one you write as you walk it. Most men never take that second door. They make peace with the lie. They decorate the cage. They tell themselves, this is just how life is. But you're here because something in you refuses to go numb. Something ancient, something sacred, something dangerous. Not reckless, not chaotic, but uncontrollable by design. You don't need a bigger goal. You don't need a smarter plan. You need a different question. What burns in me that I've silenced to survive? That's your beginning. Not a 5-year strategy, not a vision board, just a sacred refusal to live one more day as someone else's projection. Let the old version die. Let the applause fade. Let the shoulds rot in the corner. The world doesn't need another well-behaved success story. It needs men who have faced the abyss of identity and walked out without a mask. So no, you're not broken. You're awakening. You're not lost. You're done pretending. And you don't need fixing. You need a pen. Because here's what they won't tell you. The moment you stop playing the role, you stop being controlled. And that is what they fear most. ThinkMate leaves you with this. The most dangerous man in the system isn't the rebel. It's the one who no longer needs a role to know his worth.